I was mopping near the marble stairs, careful not to leave a trace. My shoes squeaked slightly, echoing under the chandelier's glow, but no one looked down. Silk gowns floated by me. Champagne glasses clinked. The guests barely noticed the girl in uniform, crouched by the baseboards. One woman even stepped around me without pausing her conversation about Milan. I had cleaned this building for months, but tonight it looked different. It sparkled. It was their gala, not mine. Or at least, that's what I thought. Until he walked in. The CEO. Impeccably dressed, sharp-eyed, and late, of course. Conversations dipped as soon as his shoes touched the marble. Cameras clicked. He took a glass, smiled politely, and then, out of nowhere, pointed in my direction. Her, he said, raising his voice. Heads turned. I froze, still holding the mop. She owns this building. For a second, silence swallowed the entire ballroom. A woman near me chuckled awkwardly, assuming it was a joke. Someone else whispered, "What did he say?" But the CEO didn't laugh. He stepped forward and repeated, slower this time, "This woman owns this building." And suddenly, the weight of the mop in my hand felt unfamiliar. Eyes landed on me with a mix of disbelief and discomfort. But he wasn't finished. He extended his hand, not to help me up, but to acknowledge me in front of them all. And just like that, I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't take his hand right away. My fingers were still damp from the mop, and years of being overlooked had taught me to doubt grand gestures. But he didn't move. He stood there with his arm outstretched, unwavering, while the eyes of every guest in that glittering hall bounced between us. Some laughed nervously. Others scoffed. A woman in a silver gown whispered, "She must have done something for him once." The violinist stopped tuning. A waiter froze mid-step, holding a tray of champagne flutes. Everything fell quiet. Slowly, I leaned the mop handle against the wall and stood up. My uniform clung to my legs, still damp from the floor. And though he kept smiling, calm, composed, protective, I could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on my back. "Is this some kind of joke?" someone called out from the crowd. But he turned to them, voice steady and clear, and said, "My mother cleaned buildings like this. She taught me who really builds the foundation." A hush swept over the room. Then he looked back at me. She didn't just invest in this place. She believed in it when everyone else walked away. That's when it hit me. He knew. He knew about the envelope I slipped under the office door years ago. He knew about the silent donation, the one I made after my husband died, because I believed in the community center this place once was. But how? And why reveal it now, in front of everyone? As he gently placed his hand on the small of my back and guided me forward, the polished marble beneath my shoes felt foreign, too smooth, too pristine for someone like me. I had scrubbed these floors on hands and knees just hours earlier. Now I was walking across them as whispers bloomed around the room, like wildfire. "Is this a PR stunt?" one man muttered behind his champagne flute. "She's not even dressed for the occasion." Another voice, softer, female, asked, "Do you think she's really the owner?" The lights shifted as we reached the center of the gala. A photographer lowered his camera, unsure whether to take the shot. That's when the CEO turned to the crowd, raised his voice, and said, "You've all admired the chandeliers, the marble, the architecture, but none of it would exist without the woman beside me." My breath caught in my throat. She kept this building from being demolished. She signed the deed. She mopped these floors when we couldn't afford cleaning staff. She's the reason we're all standing here tonight. For a moment, the silence was deafening. Then came a slow clap from the mayor's table. One by one, others joined in, unsure but swayed. My chest tightened. I wasn't used to this kind of spotlight. I wasn't sure I wanted it. But when I looked at him, this man who had known my secret and protected it like a treasure, I realized this moment wasn't just about recognition. It was about reclaiming something I had long forgotten I deserved: dignity. But why now? And why did he sound like someone who had been waiting years to say it? The applause faded, but the echoes clung to my skin like perfume I didn't choose to wear. I stood there, uncertain if I should bow, speak, or run. My hands were still raw from scrubbing the grand staircase earlier that morning, and now they trembled at my sides under the chandelier's glow. He leaned in slightly, whispering, "You don't have to say anything tonight. Let them talk." But that was the problem. They were talking. Some with admiration, yes, but others with eyes that scanned me like I was a stain on a designer rug. I heard someone laugh under their breath. "What kind of owner mops her own floors?" Another voice chimed in, "Is this charity or shame marketing?" And I knew then it wasn't over. The humiliation wasn't gone just because applause had replaced silence. I excused myself, heading toward the hallway where the coat room was. There, tucked beside a marble pillar, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My reflection in the gilded mirror looked foreign. I was wearing a borrowed dress, slightly too long, slightly too wrinkled. My hair, hastily pulled into a bun, revealed the small scar on my temple from when a shelf collapsed during repairs. That scar had been mine long before the boardroom votes, long before ownership contracts. I touched it, grounding myself. If they wanted a spectacle, they'd had one. But if he meant what he said, if he truly saw me as more than a symbol, then maybe this night was just beginning. And maybe I wasn't the only one hiding behind polished glass and rented silk. He found me near the back entrance, where the marble faded into tile and the chandeliers gave way to fluorescent shadows. "You disappeared," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the floor. Didn't want to get the mop dirty. He smiled, only slightly, but it wasn't pity. It was something quieter. "You think they see you as less because of the mop," he said. "But I saw you holding this place together before I even bought it." I wanted to believe him, but years of being invisible had built walls that no praise could knock down in a night. "You shouldn't have said that in front of everyone," I whispered. "You made it worse." He looked hurt but not surprised. "You think they laughed because of you?" he asked. "They laughed because they're afraid of people like you. People who rise without permission." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. It felt dangerous, hopeful, true. I had spent so many nights cleaning this building that I knew its heartbeat. I knew which doors creaked when the heat kicked in, and which stair hid the electrical switch. But no one ever looked twice at me, until he did. Until tonight. I met his eyes finally. "I never asked to be in the spotlight," I said. "I just wanted a roof that didn't leak." He stepped closer, softer this time. "You built the roof, and the walls, and everything inside. They just never knew." I looked down at my callous palms, then up at the ballroom. Maybe it was time they learned. When we returned to the ballroom, the music had slowed, but the whispers hadn't. I could feel their stares, sticky and curious, as if I had broken an invisible rule by daring to exist in their world. The CEO walked beside me, not shielding me, not flaunting me, just walking as if I belonged there. And maybe, for the first time, I did. A woman in a sequin gown stepped aside abruptly, as if I carried disease. Another one, holding a flute of champagne, leaned in to whisper something to her date, eyes never leaving me. But I didn't flinch this time, because, as ridiculous as it sounded, I had been given something none of them expected. A name, a place, a voice that echoed through a chandelier-lit room and said, "She owns this building." Not the kind of ownership that came from inheritance or shares, but something deeper. The ownership of sweat in the tiles, of years scrubbed into the marble, of silent nights holding up someone else's dream. And now, with just one sentence, everything had tilted. I wasn't here to play a part in someone else's story. I was the reason the building still stood. He offered me his hand, not out of romance, but respect, and I took it. We stood at the edge of the crowd like a crack in glass. "They'll never forget tonight," he murmured. I nodded, my heart pounding in my ears. Neither will I. Somewhere between shame and dignity, I had found a quiet kind of power. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a stain on the floor. I felt like the foundation. The next morning, The headlines didn't mention the CEO's speech about profits or projections. They mentioned me. Mysterious woman owns gala venue, janitor or mogul. Who is she? I had spent so long becoming invisible that I never imagined what it would feel like to suddenly become a question mark in everyone's mouth. Calls poured in. Former classmates who once mocked my accent suddenly admired my work ethic. Reporters camped outside the lobby I used to clean at 5 a.m. in silence. But more than the buzz, it was the whispers from inside the company that stung the most. Jealous assistants muttered I had tricked the CEO. A board member's wife claimed I must have some dirt on him. The truth? I had none. Just a name on a deed that no one thought I had the right to carry. Because the building wasn't mine by blood. It was mine by every forgotten hour spent fixing what others broke. By every silent morning, I unlocked the doors before anyone arrived. The CEO hadn't lied. I did own the building. I had bought it through a silent agreement with the previous owner years ago, using the compensation from an accident that nearly took my brother's life. But no one asked that. They only saw a woman in work shoes standing in marble halls. The CEO texted that morning, "Are you okay?" I stared at the message, unsure how to answer. Was I okay? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never mop those floors again. That afternoon, I returned, not as a worker, but as a guest. The gala space had been cleared out, but traces of the previous night still lingered. Wilted flowers on a silver tray, scattered programs with my name circled in red ink. I stood in the doorway, unsure of where I belonged. The same staff I once worked alongside now greeted me with hesitant bows, their smiles forced and curious. One of the waitresses I trained pulled me aside and whispered, "Did you really buy this place?" I nodded, and for a moment I saw on her eyes something no one had ever shown me before. The CEO entered minutes later, looking effortlessly composed, his tie undone just enough to seem approachable. "I was hoping you'd come back," he said, handing me a cup of tea like we were old friends. I didn't sit. I looked around, soaking in the walls I had scrubbed, the chandeliers I had polished, and I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. "Why did you say it like that?" I finally asked. "Why say I own it in front of them?" He took a breath. "Because you deserve to be seen, and I was tired of pretending you weren't." For the first time in a long time, I couldn't find words. I just stood there, letting the silence say what I couldn't. Thank you, and also why now? Why not before? Outside, someone snapped a photo through the window. And just like that, I became a symbol no one knew how to define. The photo went viral before I even got home. Someone had posted it with the caption, "From janitor to owner?" The mystery woman behind the gala. My inbox flooded. Messages from former classmates. Strangers claiming inspiration, and reporters all asking the same thing. How did this happen? I didn't answer any of them, because the truth wasn't a simple headline. It wasn't just about money or luck, or even the CEO. It was about every night I mopped those floors, listening to guests laugh like I didn't exist. It was about the comments, "Be careful, the help's still here," or "She's probably lost." It was about every time I was looked through. And now they were all looking at me. I walked past the gala hall again that night. It was locked, dark, and quiet. But my reflection in the glass doors didn't feel small anymore. I could see her clearly, the woman in the red cleaning uniform and the woman in the tailored blazer. Both were me, and both had built this. The CEO called me the next morning. "You changed everything," he said. I told him I hadn't. I had always been here. They were just finally seeing me. He laughed softly, then let them look. I didn't respond, but I smiled, because I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to whisper apologies for existing. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. I wasn't their story to write. Not anymore. I was mine. And this building, this life, I had mopped the floors of my own future, and they hadn't even noticed. I didn't show up at the next gala as staff. I arrived in a simple but elegant black dress, hair pulled back, with no need to announce myself. People paused. Some looked twice. Others whispered. One woman from the board came up to me, confused. "You're from maintenance, right?" I smiled. I was. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. The building's entrance plaque now bore my name, right under the phrase "Founding Benefactor." I didn't need them to understand everything. I just needed them to remember me. And they would. Every time they walked through those doors. That night, I stood in the back of the room, near the same corner where I used to clean up spilled champagne. The CEO was on stage giving a speech. He didn't look at me directly, but his words drifted in my direction. This place wasn't built by investors or planners alone. Sometimes greatness starts in silence, in overlooked spaces, with people no one bothers to see. His voice cracked slightly, but he recovered. And when that greatness finally stands up, it changes everything. A few heads turned toward me, uncertain. I stayed where I was. I didn't step forward. This wasn't about applause. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space, not just physically, but emotionally. I'd spent years making myself small, hoping to stay out of trouble, hoping not to be seen. But invisibility is heavy. Now I was finally free of it, and the weight I carried, it didn't disappear. I just learned how to use it to stand taller. And this time, I wasn't standing in anyone's shadow. After the speech, I moved toward the side exit, trying to avoid the flood of socialites drifting toward the CEO. I wasn't trying to make a scene, but the silence around me shifted. A woman from the design firm stopped mid-sentence as I passed. A waiter lowered his tray, slightly, eyes wide. No one said anything aloud, but the murmurs filled the space like soft thunder. Then I heard her voice, his fiancée. "Why is she even here?" she hissed, not quietly enough. I turned slightly, caught her reflection in a wall mirror. She looked furious. She stepped toward me, but this time I didn't flinch. The last time we'd been in the same room, she hadn't even looked in my direction. She didn't see me then, not really. And that's what terrified her now. Visibility, power, dignity. I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. I just stood still. That alone shook her. She tried to grab the armrest of a nearby chair like it would anchor her. But her world had already shifted. The people around us were no longer listening to her. They were watching me. Not because of the drama, but because something in them recognized a different kind of presence. The kind that can't be bought or curated. The kind built in silence, pain, and quiet persistence. That's when the CEO looked over. Just for a second. But he didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't frown. He just looked, acknowledging, present, and almost proud. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need an introduction. I didn't need a title. My existence, my story, and my resilience were already louder than anything I could say. As the gala continued, I slipped out into the hallway, not to run, but to breathe. The air outside the ballroom was cooler, quieter, and for a moment, I let myself feel the weight of everything. Not shame, never again, but the years I had spent invisible. The hours I spent cleaning this very floor when no one noticed my name on the lease. The times I answered to help when I signed the checks that paid their salaries. That building had been mine for 6 years, bought with settlements, long shifts, and one deal I'd made under a flickering office light. No one cared about my story then. They do now. Behind me, I heard footsteps measured slow. I didn't turn. I already knew who it was. "You were going to leave without saying anything," he said softly. His voice was different now. No command, no performance. Just a man who'd seen something break and shift. I finally faced him. I didn't think I had anything else to prove. He shook his head. "You don't. But people like her, they hate what they can't erase." I smiled, not because he defended me, but because I already knew. I'd lived through worse, survived louder silences. This moment wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about him. It was about everything I had carried to get here, and the quiet satisfaction of not needing permission anymore. I stepped past him, back into the ballroom, not to reclaim space, but to occupy it fully. This time no one looked through me. They looked at me, and none of them knew what hit them. By the time I re-entered the ballroom, the atmosphere had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The servers paused. The violinist missed a note. The same woman who had laughed behind her glass earlier now looked away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't raise my hand. I just walked past the crystal chandeliers and golden trim, my mop still drying near the edge of the service corridor, like a ghost of who they thought I was. I passed by the mayor, the donors, the board members, all the people who had once nodded politely at me without remembering my name. But tonight they remembered. Not because I spoke, not because I demanded anything, but because the CEO had told them the one truth they'd never imagine. I owned the building they were standing in. That revelation, dropped like silk, had rewired the air. It had cracked open something they couldn't seal again. I wasn't the help. I wasn't the background. I was the foundation, the walls, the signature on every marble tile beneath their designer shoes. A journalist approached me gently, asking if I had time for a short interview. I smiled and said, "Only if you get the spelling of my name right." She nodded. Somewhere in the corner, I saw the CEO again. This time watching, not performing. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. This moment belonged to me, not to our history. Not to romance or justice, but to the raw, earned power of being seen. And as I looked around, I realized something. They weren't whispering because I'd made a scene. They were whispering because, for the first time, I'd been undeniable. I didn't linger to bask in it. That wasn't who I was. While they hesitated to approach, unsure whether I'd turned unreachable or just unrecognizable, I simply stepped aside and headed to the back, where the mop closet still carried the scent of lemon and bleach, and the shoes I'd changed out of sat in a plastic bag. That space had protected me for years. It had heard me hum on slow nights, cry when rent nearly swallowed me whole, and whisper dreams I never told a soul. I sat there for a moment and laughed quietly, not bitterly but in relief. I hadn't dreamed this. I hadn't made it up in my head. A man had stood in front of a crowd and told them, with no hesitation, "She owns this building." And they had heard it. Finally, they didn't hear it from me. They heard it from someone they respected. It stung a little, yes. That my own voice wasn't enough. That my silence had made me invisible for too long. But it also freed me, because I no longer needed to correct them. I no longer needed to smile, just to soften their discomfort. The mop, the uniform, the rubber gloves, I could hang them up without shame. They were part of my journey, not proof of my place. A gentle knock on the door pulled me out of the moment. It was one of the older board members. She looked hesitant, like she wasn't sure how to begin. "I'd like to apologize," she said. And I realized, tonight wasn't just a twist in their story. It was a rewrite of mine. I stepped out one last time, not as staff, not as background, but as the owner of every beam holding up that chandelier, of every brick under their heels. No one handed me a mic, and I didn't need one. My presence alone echoed louder than applause. The CEO found me near the back entrance. His jacket was gone, sleeves rolled, hair slightly messy, as if he had fought through the crowd just to get to me. "I know you're not one for speeches," he said softly, "but I wanted to thank you for building something I could only admire from the outside." I blinked. "You mean the company?" He shook his head. "No, I mean this. The way you stood here all these years and never asked to be seen." His words undid something in me, and maybe for the first time, I didn't brush it off. I let it land, let it matter. A few staff members looked at me differently that night, not with pity, but with curiosity. Respect. One of them asked me what it felt like to keep a secret so big for so long. I smiled and replied, I wasn't hiding it. I was just waiting for the right moment to show it. And maybe that moment wasn't about me at all, but about what changes when someone ordinary dares to be undeniable. So when I left that night, I didn't look back at the guests or the gala lights. I looked at the floor I once mopped and whispered, "Thank you." But tell me honestly, would you have believed it if he hadn't said it first?